January 13th, 2006, 2:38 p.m. Buenos Aires, Argentina. The afternoon shift at Banco Río branch is settling into their typical Friday routine when 6 men walk through the front doors dressed in suits and carrying briefcases. They look like businessmen. Polite, profesional, un remarcable. The security guard barely glances at them as they approach the customer service area. Then one of them pulls out a gun. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a robbery, but nobody needs to get hurt. Please remain calm and follow our instructions. What happened next would become Argentina's most infamous bank heist. Not because of the violence, but because of the complete lack of it. For the next 5 hours, these 6 men would hold 23 hostages while stealing $20 million, all while maintaining a level of courtesy and professionalism that left victims calling them gentlemen robbers. They ordered pizza for hungry hoste. They gave interviews to television reporters. They even helped an elderly customer with her banking needs before letting her go. But beneath their polite exterior was a plan so sophisticated and well-researched that it would take police years to understand what actually happened. This is the story of how 6 criminals turned a bank robbery into a masterclass in psychological manipulation, media control, and the perfect escape. How they studied their target for months, planned for every contingency, and walked away with $20 million while the entire world watched on live television. And how their meticulous planning was almost undone by the one thing they could uncontrol: human nature. The Banco branch in Acasuso was never supposed to be an easy target. Located in an upscale Buenos Aires suburb, it served wealthy clients and handled large cash transactions daily. The building itself was modern and secure. Reinforced glass, electronic locks, multiple security cameras, and a direct alarm connection to local police. More importantly, it sat on a busy street with heavy foot traffic and multiple businesses nearby. Any criminal activity would be noticed immediately. But that's exactly why Fernando Araujo chose it. Araujo wasn't a typical bank robber. The 42-year-old former construction worker had spent 2 years in prison for armed robbery in the 1990s, and the experience had taught him that most criminals fail because they rely on speed and violence rather than planning and intelligence. When he got out of prison in 2003, he decided that if he was going to rob another bank, he would do it right. He spent 18 months studying the Acasuso branch, learning everything about its operations, security procedures, and daily routines. He posed as a potential customer, visiting the bank dozens of times to open accounts, make deposits, and observe how the staff handled different situations. He memorized the names of employees, the schedule of security guards, and the timing of cash deliveries. Most importantly, he identified the bank's greatest vulnerability: not its security system, but its location. The Acasuso branch sat directly above the city's storm drain system, with large concrete tunnels running beneath the building. Araujo realized that if he could access those tunnels, he could potentially dig up into the bank's vault from below. But tunnel digging would take months and require specialized equipment. Araujo needed a different approach, one that would get him inside the bank legally and give him time to work. That is, when he conceived what would become known as the gentleman robbery, a hostage situation designed not to terrify, but to create the perfect cover for an elaborate heist. Araujo assembled his team carefully over the course of 2005. His lieutenant was Delator, a 38-year-old electronics expert who could handle alarm systems and surveillance equipment. Next was Garcia, a 29-year-old former bank employee who understood banking procedures and vault operations from the inside. The team also included Mario, a 33-year-old locksmith who specialized in high-security systems. Carlos Vitet, a 31-year-old who would serve as lookout and communications coordinator, and Luis Elia, a 35-year-old driver with extensive knowledge of Buenos Aires streets and escape routes. But Araujo's most crucial recruit wasn't a criminal at all. It was Jorge Ciucci, a 45-year-old businessman who owned construction equipment and had access to tunneling tools. Ciucci believed he was being hired for a legitimate excavation project and had no idea he was contributing to a bank robbery. The plan Araujo developed was unlike any bank heist in criminal history. Rather than rushing in and rushing out, they would take the bank hostage and hold it for hours, using the time to systematically loot not just the vault, but every safe deposit box in the facility. They would present themselves as desperate but reasonable criminals, maintaining a dialogue with police negotiators, while their real work happened out of sight. The psychological element was crucial. By treating hostages with courtesy and respect, they would create a Stockholm Syndrome effect that would make victims less likely to resist or provide detailed descriptions later. By maintaining communication with police, they would control the narrative and keep authorities focused on negotiation rather than tactical intervention. Most ingeniously, they would use the media attention to their advantage. Bank robberies in Buenos Aires typically attracted television coverage, and Araujo planned to give interviews that would present them as sympathetic figures rather than dangerous criminals. The longer they could keep the situation calm and newsworthy, the more time they would have to complete their real objective. January 13th, 2006. The plan went into action with military precision. At 2:38 p.m., the 6 men entered the bank during the busy afternoon period when maximum customers would be present. Garcia, the former bank employee, immediately took control of the situation with his inside knowledge of procedures and personnel. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to rob the bank, but we're not here to hurt anyone, Garcia announced in a calm, professional voice. If everyone cooperates, this will be over quickly and safely for all of us. The 23 people in the bank, customers, employees, and security guards were gathered in the main lobby and told to sit quietly while the robbers assessed the situation. What struck everyone immediately was how polite and organized the criminals were. They addressed hostages as sir and madam. They apologized for the inconvenience. They assured everyone repeatedly that no one would be harmed if they remained calm. Within minutes, had disabled the bank's alarm system and security cameras, while Vitet positioned himself at the front door to monitor police response. Zelaya remained outside in a getaway vehicle, maintaining radio contact with the team inside. Meanwhile, Araujo and Garcia began their reconnaissance of the vault area, gathering information they would need for the main phase of the operation. By 3:15 p.m., police had surrounded the building and established a negotiation line. This was exactly what Araujo had planned for. He took the phone and began what would become a 5-hour conversation with police negotiators, presenting himself as the leader of a desperate group who had turned to crime out of economic necessity. "We're not killers," Araujo told the police negotiator. "We're just working men who got squeezed out by the system. We don't want to hurt anyone, but we need to take care of our families." The negotiation served multiple purposes. It kept police focused on peaceful resolution rather than tactical assault. It provided cover for the real work happening in the vault area. And most importantly, it created the media spectacle that would become central to their escape plan. By 4 p.m., television news trucks had arrived and were broadcasting live coverage of the hostage situation. Reporters described the unusual politeness of the criminals and the calm atmosphere inside the bank. When one elderly hostage complained of being hungry, the robbers ordered pizza for everyone. Hostages, criminals, and police officers outside. The image of pizza delivery to an active bank robbery became an international news story. But while the media focused on the surreal courtesy of the gentlemen robbers, the real heist was happening out of sight. Using detailed intelligence Garcia had provided about the bank's layout, Araujo and were systematically accessing every safe deposit box in the facility. They had studied which boxers belonged to the bank's wealthiest clients and prioritized those containing cash, jewelry, and bearer bonds. The safe deposit box operation was meticulous and professional. Each box was opened using specialized tools, its contents cataloged and packed into specially prepared bags. High-value items were separated from documents and personal effects that would be of no value on the black market. Everything was organized for quick transport when the time came to leave. Meanwhile, De La Torre was working on the bank's electronic systems, not just to prevent alarms, but to erase digital evidence of their activities. He corrupted security footage, deleted transaction records, and planted false data that would confuse investigators about what had actually been stolen and how. By 6 p.m., the media circus outside had grown to include international news crews. The polite bank robbers of Buenos Aires had become a global human interest story. Reporters noted that hostages seemed remarkably calm, and that some were actually chatting with their captors about family and work. This was all part of Araujo's psychological strategy. The more normal and unthreatening the situation appeared, the less likely police were to attempt a violent resolution. The longer the standoff continued peacefully, the more time his team had to complete their systematic looting of the bank's most valuable assets. At 7:30 p.m., Araujo made his final demand to police negotiators. He wanted safe passage for his team and the hostages to the nearby port, where they claimed to have a boat waiting. In exchange, they would release all hostages unharmed and surrender to authorities once they reached international waters. Police agreed to the demand, believing they could apprehend the criminals during the transport process. What they didn't know was that Araujo had never intended to go to the port at all. At 8:45 p.m., after more than 6 hours inside the bank, the robbers emerged with their They had stolen an estimated $20 million in cash, jewelry, and bearer bonds from the vault and safe deposit boxers. But more impressively, they had maintained such a courteous and professional demeanor that several hostages publicly thanked them for their kindness during interviews with reporters. The group boarded a bus provided by police and began what was supposed to be a journey to the port. But 2 blocks from the bank, Araujo announced a change of plans. The bus stopped, and the robbers released all the hostages unharmed on a street corner. They then commandeered the bus and drove toward the port as planned. But when police finally caught up with the bus 20 minutes later, they found it empty except for the driver, who had been released unharmed. The 6 robbers had simply vanished, along with $20 million in stolen goods. The investigation that followed revealed the true sophistication of Araujo's plan. The trip to the port had been an elaborate misdirection. While police were tracking the bus, the real escape was happening through the storm drain system that Araujo had studied for months. The robbers had accessed the tunnels through a maintenance entrance and were already miles away by the sun. Authorities realized they'd been deceived, but the most shocking discovery came 3 days later when investigators found the construction equipment that had been used to dig access routes through the storm drain system. The equipment belonged to Jorge Succi, the businessman who had unknowingly provided tools for the heist. When confronted by police, Ciucci revealed that he had been hired by Araujo for what he believed was a legitimate tunneling project months earlier. The investigation uncovered a level of planning that impressed even seasoned detectives. Araujo had spent over a year studying not just the bank, but the entire neighborhood infrastructure. He had maps of every tunnel, drain, and underground passage in the area. He had backup escape routes, alternate rendezvous points, and contingency plans for every possible police response. Most remarkably, he had psychologically prepared his team to maintain the gentleman robber persona under extreme pressure. The politeness was on just good public relations. It was a carefully calculated strategy to reduce resistance from hostages, an aggressive response from police. The manhunt for the Banco robbers lasted 2 years and involved hundreds of investigators across Argentina. Despite extensive media coverage and a substantial reward, none of the 6 men were ever captured. Investigators believe they fled to neighboring countries using false identities prepared long before the heist. Fernando Araujo was finally arrested in 2008, not for the bank robbery, but for an unrelated fraud scheme. During his interrogation, he admitted to planning the Banco heist, but refused to reveal the identities of his accomplices or the location of the stolen money. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, where he became something of a celebrity among other inmates. For his courteous treatment of the bank hostage, the other 5 robbers were never found. Investigators believe they successfully laundered their shares of the stolen money and are living comfortable lives under assumed identities. The $20 million in cash, jewelry, and bearer bonds was never recovered. Today, the Banco heist is studied in law enforcement academies as an example of how criminals can manipulate media coverage and public perception to their advantage. The robbers' courteous behavior created such a positive impression that many Argentinians actually rooted for them to escape, viewing them as folk heroes rather than dangerous criminals. The heist also revealed serious vulnerabilities in Argentina's banking security protocols. New regulations were implemented requiring enhanced vault security, improved alarm systems, and better coordination between banks and law enforcement during hostage situations. But perhaps the most lasting impact of the Banco robbery was what it demonstrated about the power of psychology in criminal operations. By treating their victims with courtesy and respect, the robbers not only reduced immediate resistance, but created a narrative that worked in their favor long after the crime was complete. The gentleman robbers proved that in the modern media age, perception can be more valuable than violence, and that sometimes the most effective weapon in a criminal's arsenal is not a gun. It has good manners. If you found this story as fascinating as I did while researching it, make sure you subscribe because next week, I'm investigating the Gardner Museum heist. The greatest art theft in history, where thieves dressed as police officers stole 30 masterpieces worth over $500 million and were never caught. These stories of elaborate deception and perfect escapes revealed the incredible creativity criminals will use to outsmart the system. What do you think was the most brilliant aspect of their plan? The psychological manipulation, the media strategy, or the underground escape route? Let me know in the comments. Your insights help me understand how these masterminds think.